Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 172. Watson Does Not Lie, and Doyle's Rotary Coffin.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, welcome back to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And we are delighted to welcome you to this episode, our first episode of July of 2019. And we have a special conversation, a two-parter really, or a two-headed conversation queued up with Paul Thomas Miller. We'll be getting to that in just a moment. Meanwhile, I wanted to take a moment and do a couple of shout-outs. You know, we have regular supporters who support us on an ongoing basis every month here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, or every episode, that is. The same over on Trifles, and we do appreciate that support. And if you're interested in doing that, you can do it anywhere from $1 to whatever you want. And I wanted to call out a couple of the people that put in the whatever they want supports. They just did a one-time gift, but they were very generous in doing so. One was Doug Vaughn, who was very specifically supporting Trifles and I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. And the other is Charles Blankstein, who also put together a very generous and canonical number for us for his support. So Charles and Doug, thank you both for your generous support of what we're doing here. And if anyone else would like to join them, just go to ihearofsherlock.com or sherlockholmespodcast.com and click on those donate or become a patron buttons and decide what works for you. And of course, while you're at that site, you can leave us a comment. The show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/ihose172. You can drop us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com, and you can reach us on the social networks as I Hear of Sherlock. And don't forget, we still have a telephone number, even though no one calls it anymore. If you really want to stand out, that's a way to get to us. 774-221-7323, 774-221-READ. We are pleased to welcome Paul Thomas Miller to the program. Paul is a Holmesian, or Holmesian, for those of you that really want to be against the grain, who lives in Portsmouth, England, which, if you're going to be a Holmesian, I suppose that is one of the better places to reside. You, of course, recognize that as the site of Bush Villas, which is the spiritual birthplace of Sherlock Holmes. That is where Conan Doyle had his home and offices for a time. And of course, Portsmouth also has Portsmouth Library, which is home to the Richard Lancelin Green Collection, one of the foremost collections of Doyleana and Sherlockiana in the entire world. So there we have Paul sitting on his South Sea shingle with his wife and two boys who are eminently patient, allowing him to spend time with us on a wonderful summer afternoon or evening. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, I suppose this is the perfect time to ask you about how you first got involved with Sherlock Holmes.
Well, the first Holmes I remember reading was Penguin 60. For their 60th anniversary, the Penguin Publishing House, they brought out a lot of very small books, and it was a small copy of The Man with the Twisted Lip.
Huh.
I remember reading that whilst I was sat on a checkout serving people in a supermarket in Portsmouth. It wasn't the most enthralling job I've ever had, and it fitted nicely under the till.
Well,
so that was my first one.
So you grew up in Portsmouth then?
I did, yeah, born and bred in Portsmouth.
So were you aware that you were surrounded by all of this Holmesian history? Or Holmesian
it kind of passed me by. I really didn't appreciate what I had here. But like a lot of the newer Holmesians, I was brought in by Benedict Cumberbatch when that series started.
Personally?
I was recognising bits in there from the stories that I'd read in the past. That made me go back and reread the canon. And yeah, it spiraled out of control from there, really.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And did you make any connections to the local Portsmouth community?
Well, I'm starting to now. Pretty early on, I found out about the Lancelin Green collection and got myself down the museum. There's a nice display down the museum, and saw what Richard had. They've got lots of it laid out, and I thought I want a collection like that. What I didn't realise is what they've got on display there is the tip of the iceberg.
Oh yeah.
You know, then I found out about what's stored at the library, which is amazing.
Have you done any digging in the archives there, or have you just kept yourself a portion to the public exhibits?
I have. There's some lovely people down there, Laura Weston and Michael Gunton, that run the archive, and they've been very kind. A few times, you know, there's been other Holmesians have asked me if I wouldn't mind popping in there doing a bit of research for them, and it's always a pleasure. Those are the best ones, because those are the times when you find things that you would never have found on your own.
Ah. So what are some of the things that people have, the errands that people have sent you on that helped you to uncover some amazing things in the collection?
I really enjoyed was, you might have noticed in the Baker Street Journal last Christmas, the annual, there was that wonderful bit by Matthias and Nick about the exhibitions. Mm-hmm. Matthias got me down there doing a little bit of rooting around for him, which was wonderful. I absolutely love it. Find all sorts of things. One of my favourite finds was there's a lovely letter in there that Adrian Doyle has written to somebody, I forget who, where he's really taking exception to the Ellery Queen book, The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes. He's some quite strong language about the lunatics involved in Holmesiana.
Oh, good old adrenaline, as Edgar used to call him.
It's a wonderful letter. So I photocopied it, obviously, and brought it home with me because I love it. And not long after that, Matthias sent me in the post, completely unprovoked, a copy of The Misadventures.
Oh, wow.
So now I get to use that letter as the bookmark in the very book that he hated, which is a wonderful thing to do.
Well,
so surrounded by that collection, have you become a collector in a small way or a big way or any way?
I've become very much a collector in the Shaw sense of the word, all the selectivity of a vacuum cleaner. I used to have a small music studio in the loft in our house, and gradually that has shrunk, and slowly Sherlock Holmes has taken it over, and it's now got a sign at the bottom of the stairs where it declares that you're now entering the Sherloft.
You've been Sherlofted.
Sherlocked.
It's my little haven.
That's great.
Great. So what are some of the, have you collected some obscure things? You know, Shaw had Sherlockian chocolates and also soaps and all sorts of things.
I'm just looking around me. What are the most peculiar things? I think the most unusual one that I've got at the moment is probably the framed wrapper for a loaf of bread. Because it happens to have a picture of Sherlock Gnomes on it.
Oh, look at that. That's great.
It's not everybody in the world that, likes to put framed wrappings on their walls.
See, I thought you were going to say it was the Sherloaf, and I was going to be very envious because if there was a Sherloaf, I would go down to my local grocery and buy it immediately.
I as soon as I saw it, I couldn't believe they hadn't used that.
Right.
I felt like writing to Hovis to complain.
Well, I'm glad they've risen to the occasion.
Oh God!
Sorry. So the reaction that Adrian Conan Doyle had to so much of the Sherlockian goings on and publications at the time, when he was trying to, on the one hand, protect the memory of his father and his father's assets, and certainly the future income of the estate. You know, the Doyle sons trying as hard as they could to get their stamp on everything with a licensing deal. This kind of leads to the first part of our two-part topic today, which is Doyle's Rotary Coffin, which to me would imply that someone is spinning in a grave somewhere. You want to tell us about what Doyle's Rotary Coffin is and why people should take note of it?
Yeah, it's a fairly new society. One of the founding members, there's several. It span out of the Will Ferrell film. That's where it sort of got started. There was a lot of negativity around the film. People, this isn't proper Sherlock. They've gone too far this time, that sort of thing. And there was a little group of us that just sort of loved it. The fact that they managed to mess with Sherlock Holmes so much, yet he remains Sherlock Holmes, that it was just stupid as stupid could be. And we relished in it for its badness. And somewhere early on, we came up with this name for our little group called Doyle's Rotary Coffin, where, obviously we're enjoying the things that would make Arthur spin in his grave. And it's sort of developed from there. It's become more about encouraging, just enjoying Holmes as much as possible. Trying to get away from any kind of negativity. Everybody can enjoy Holmes in whatever the way they want, and we'll celebrate that and we'll affirm that to ourselves because it just makes it all better.
I love the inclusivity of that, but it's also remarkable to hear that something positive has come out of the Will Ferrell movie. I think we may need to call Entertainment Tonight and tell them that.
And this is the thing. One of our sort of games that we play is trying to find that silver lining to every version of Holmes that's out there. So one of the projects we're doing at the moment, somebody published a list of 70 Holmes films and ranked them in order of preference. So they kind of created a worst 35 list. And we've been going through that and just for every single one trying to argue, no, this is a good Holmes because it kind of runs with that Baker Street Babes ethos, all Holmes is good Holmes. It takes that and runs with it to insane conclusions at times. When you're watching one of these straight to DVD films, where the acting's more wood in the forest. It's really difficult to find the gems in that, but they are there.
Now, that list of the 35 worst Holmes films, which, as I'm sure, we'll have links obviously in the show notes.
We do, yeah.
I'm sure our listeners can figure out where Doyle's Rotary Coffin might be on the internet. Is that a static list, and is that arranged as if the first film on the list is the absolute worst, or is it arranged that the 35th film is the absolute worst, or does it not matter?
The way that it's arranged is number one is the absolute worst. And I can see where they were coming from. I won't deny it. But there are joys in there as well. So, yeah. And to be fair to the guy that put the list together, he wasn't really saying these are 35 bad Holmes films. What he was saying was out of 70, this one was the worst and this one was the best. So, yeah, I've toyed with it a bit for my own ends, suggesting that he's called it the worst. But it gave us a nice project to start off with.
Well, so is this list fairly static at this point? You don't expect to be changing the rankings?
I don't expect to change it. This is one guy's opinion. What I do expect is to find other similar lists in future and go through those as well. You know, any film that somebody likes to say is bad, I'm going to find somebody to say that it's good.
All right. Well, we should tell our listeners who might not be able to go over to the internet and find out that if you were looking at this, so as you say, the first one on the list is the absolute worst, you would have to go down to number 5 to find the Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly Holmes and Watson movie.
Wow.
So that just raises all sorts of interesting speculations about what could possibly be 4, 3, 2, and 1.
And I'll tell you what, they are well worth checking out.
All right.
I recommend application of alcohol and friends to laugh with. But they are real stinkers.
Well, we will have a link directly to the 35 worst films, ? On the Doyle's Rotary Coffin site, as well as the site overall. You know, Paul, it's perfect that we've got you lined up right after the episode we did on John Bennett Shaw, not just because of your collecting sensibilities and your Sherlock Gnomes bread loaf wrapper, but because, as we discussed, I think it was in the closing segments of the interview, Bert, we discussed how John was just so warm and welcoming and never met certainly a Sherlockian, but also a Sherlock Holmes related item that he didn't like.
I've got to admit, I was listening to that podcast, and as I'm listening to it and getting to know Shaw through Jim's discussion, I'm realizing more and more that he's this archetypal Holmesian that really we should all be aiming to be. You know, the guy who wants to include as many different people and as many different Holmeses as possible and make it a positive thing for everybody. And that's kind of slightly deeper role that I see Doyle's Rotary Coffin filling. It's that little reminder to just be your best. You know, you might not like a thing, but doesn't mean you have to tell everybody else they can't like it.
There you go. I think that's very well put.
Yeah, for that reason, we've purposely made it the least exclusive home society out there. You know, if you want to join, the way you join is by wanting to join. That's it. You've just joined. You know, there's no hoops to jump through. If you want, on the website, you can print yourself off a membership card. If you don't want to, that's fine. You know. But yeah, it's sort of that little nudge, that little reminder, you know, to appreciate it all. You know, it's a wonderful hobby that we've got. It's very community driven. And you see it all the time. From the minute that I stepped into the wider Holmes community, just everyone's been so lovely. And that's what makes it great.
Yeah.
I just think every now and again we can do with a little reminder.
I think that's wonderful. And we run into these inflection points in our little hobby. We have over the course of the last century, really. I have to imagine that there is someone who, was raised on reading Sherlock Holmes in the Strand magazine and seeing William Gillette on stage. And they didn't appreciate these young whippersnappers coming along who enjoyed their John Barrymore or their Arthur Wantner. To them, Holmes was kind of frozen in time. And yet, these interests are what brought them together and continue to do so, over time. So that's perfect. Now, we should also mention, if folks listening at home have not yet listened to episode 160, that is the episode where we discussed adapting Sherlock Holmes with Jeremy Latour and Ariel Lipshaw. They went through a number of Sherlock Holmes adaptations on film and compared and contrasted each one. And, like you're saying, Paul, they didn't say that one was terrible and another was great. They looked at, which worked for the particular genre, which was true to character, if not true to life, as it were. And they were able to come up with a ranking themselves, again, which is completely subjective. But it was a great discussion point about how we can all come together and enjoy different things and different adaptations and still hold together.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Exactly how I say it. It's I don't like every single iteration of Sherlock Holmes. There's a certain one, I'm not going to name it, but there's a certain one that really rankles me. But I'm glad it exists. I mean, it might be low on my list, but I'm glad it exists because there's other people that do like that I wouldn't know if they hadn't been brought into Holmes through that Holmes. So, it's all good.
There you go. And make sure, folks, that you check out the link that we have to the Is This Good Holmes flowchart that Paul has on the Doyles Rotary Coffin website. It's a great exercise, color-coded and everything, to help you think through your particular opinion on a particular adaptation. It's well worth checking out.
I bought crayons specially for it.
Well, we're going to take a break now and hear from our sponsor, and we'll be back just after that to talk with Paul about his book that's coming out.
Humor, especially Sherlockian humor, plays a big role in the books published by the Wessex Press. Our shop foreman, Sinewald, says this is his favorite joke. You old English speakers recognize that old chestnut, how many shepherds does it take to shoe a horse? But you will have even more fun with your copy of The True Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Terence Faherty. Incredible but true, you can now read the early first drafts of the cases of Sherlock Holmes written in Dr. Watson's own hand. Learn the true facts behind the engineer's thumb and the strange insanity of General Waxbutton. Hear about the adventure of the notorious parasol chaser and the true profession of the man with the twisted lip who struck it big as a part-time bustle fitter. And it's available right now at WessexPress.com. Friends, it's summer, the perfect time for a cool drink and a long laugh. Get the true adventures of Sherlock Holmes from the Wessex Press today.
Well, always good to hear from our friends at Wessex Press. Now, Paul, we're going to talk about a different publisher here. We're going to talk about Wildside Press, who have been featured here previously with some of Chris Redmond's books. But they are publishing your book, which is called Watson Does Not Lie. And the title alone was intriguing to me because I thought, well, where did Watson lie that we had we had to come up with this. But it turns out that yours is a chronology of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and takes a very different tack on chronologies than others that we've seen in the past. And of course, we had Vincent Wright on here to talk about chronologies a few episodes ago. I've got a link to his episode. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the inception for Watson Does Not Lie and why you really wanted to tackle this chronology?
Well, this came from the collection at Portsmouth Library. One of the books that I picked up off the shelves there was a copy of Bell's Chronology, which really appealed to me. It's a really well-written chronology. It's very accessible, and it's got that tinge of humour to it that I think we all enjoy. But as I was reading it over and over again, he's telling me why, Watson's made a mistake here. Watson's lied here. Watson's, played fast and loose with the facts. And that's why the date is actually whatever it is. And one of the first societies that I joined was the John H. Watson Society. And as a Watsonian, that sort of stuck in my craw a bit, the idea that they're saying Watson would lie to us. If you're going to go along those lines, you might as well accept that the entire book's a fiction, which of course is not true.
Right.
So I set about, it started with just one or two of the stories. I was going to try and date them and explain why the dates that you can get from the stories are absolutely accurate and explain away any problems, so that Watson comes out of it looking nice and clean. And it's sort of, it spiraled out of control, really, is what happened. And before I knew it, what I'd done is written an entire book, where I've placed all of the stories in order, given all of them as accurate a date as possible. And the goal was to do that without ever once suggesting that Watson has lied to us. Now, there's a couple of stories that I'm sure everybody is aware that's a difficult thing to do. Wisteria Lodge was a particularly difficult one.
And explain to our listeners why that's the case.
Well, Wisteria Lodge, we're told by Watson, happens in 1892, which unfortunately is bang in the middle of the period where Holmes was supposedly dead at the bottom of the Reichenbach Falls. So his mysterious return to Baker Street right in the middle of his death, well, other people it's caused them problems. I found it was perfectly easy to explain.
And how is that? I mean, well, how have other chronologers tackled that first?
Almost every chronology that I've read has suggested that the date's wrong.
Okay.
But Watson is really clear at the start of that story that this is the date when it happened. I've only encountered one other explanation for it that puts it on the right date, which I won't butcher by trying to explain myself, but it is well worth checking out Brad Kefauver's explanation. I really enjoyed it. It's easy enough to find. Just Google Brad. I found my way around it. I'm not going to say what I did because, frankly, I'm so pleased with how I wrote it in the book that I think that's the place to see it. But
I'll tell you,
possible.
As someone who's read the canon many times and annotated versions and chronologies and whatnot, I have to say, when I came across your explanation, I thought, well, of course, that makes so much sense. Now, there are still certain things I, needed to work out. But the notion that what happened, the way you describe it, again, it fit right in, very logical and very much in line with what you would expect of certain characters in the canon.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I found as I was going through it. The more these things all started slotting into place nice and neatly, the more convinced I was that these people who seem to think these are fictitious stories are clearly off their rockers.
Now, you have a series of premises that you put out there as to that sets the stage for the book. We already know that, Watson does not lie is one of them. A corollary to that is Holmes does not lie. What are some of the other premises that you have established in writing this book that are worth talking about?
Now, I'm going to have to correct you for starters there. I do say that Watson doesn't lie. That is one of my premises. Yeah. I also say that Holmes does lie.
Does lie. My mistake.
Frequently and shockingly, Holmes is a very deceptive person. But throughout all of that, Watson is very accurate in his reporting of what Holmes has said to him, what Holmes has done, or what Holmes has appeared to do. So those are the two main ones. Hot on the heels of those came that we don't know how many wives Watson had. An awful lot of the chronologies that I've read in the past have suggested that there were maybe one or two, occasionally 3 wives, and they've tried to twist the stories to fit in with that, because Watson's so often either starting the story saying he's at Baker Street or he's at home with a wife. So I started from the premise that there could be any number of wives, and I wasn't going to let that affect where I put stories. And consequently, it turns out he was quite the Casanova.
Well, this is John 3 Continents Watson we're talking about, after all.
Exactly. And some of his marriages, they were shockingly brief. We can only guess why. There's no clues in the text. I've got a personal theory that Holmes was jealous of them, and he did have a very good knowledge of poisons after all.
Well, he did value their friendship, and Watson was his primary PR man. So, you lose that, and you lose your ability to pay for the Baker Street flat.
Exactly. He had a lot of expenses there.
Well, now, so give us a little window into your view of Holmes, because as you point out, the other side of the Watson does not lie coin is that Holmes does. And in fact, throughout here, you do have examples of charades, deceptions, misdirections, and things like that. So how would you describe, your sense of Holmes as a person based on this shocking series of behaviors?
Well, I've got to say, for me, the canon has always been, as Morley put it, it's a textbook of friendship. I do see Holmes as a good person, but he was also a practical person who, if the circumstances demanded a certain action, he was quite happy to take them.
So it's interesting, this view of Watson does not lie. And so you really do a great job in the book of teasing out the implications of that. So is there more that you have done to sort of extend that thinking about Watson does not lie? Have you explored that in other ways?
Yeah, there's lots of other, apart from the dates, there's lots of other things to discuss about what Watson has and hasn't lied about in the stories. And I have started a blog called Watson Does Not Lie, where I've been tackling those on a very irregular basis. I tackle all sorts of stuff over there. So one of the things that struck me was in the story of the Blue Carbuncle, there's the gemstone getting hidden in the crop of a goose. Problem with that one that lots of people have raised is that geese do not have crops. Lots of people have suggested from that, Watson's lying. But I went back and looked at it, and actually Watson himself never actually says that the stone has been hidden in the goose crop. What he does do is report James Ryder and Peterson the Commissioner, saying that that's where the gem was hidden. From there, you can realise that James Ryder, he's a hotel manager. He doesn't know much about geese, so he might have misunderstood. As for Peterson the Commissioner, I've got a theory that his wife never did say that she found the stone in the goose's crop, but perhaps something that sounded a bit similar to that.
Yeah, Peter Blau had that theory years ago, that the O was transposed from an A originally. So
there you go. There's nothing new under the sun.
That makes sense. I like that. Well, and that's a very shrewd reading of the canon, because for people to say, well, Watson said there was a crop. Well, no, he didn't. He quoted someone else who in turn was quoted to by someone else. So, it's very logical when you stop to really pick it apart, but we're so quick to jump to these foregone conclusions that it's really a nice reset.
Exactly. Watson never did lie to us once. Everything that he told us was the truth. There's perhaps one obvious exception, which is the address of Baker Street. He is rather firm on what the address is, but that can easily be explained away by, Holmes has obviously asked for him to hide the address so that they don't get cranks at the door all the time.
Now, I must admit, yours is the first chronology that I've seen that goes as far back as, I believe 1543 is the date.
I've included in the full timeline absolutely every date relevant to the canon that I could. And there is, 1543, that's the date from, the Valley of Fear, where the manor house is reported to have burnt down. So I start from there. That was the earliest, and I think I go all the way up to it must be his last bow.
That's impressive. So really, again, picking the canon apart with a fine-tooth comb, not just assessing what the dates of the action were, but looking at the dialogue, looking at what the characters were saying to each other, or not the characters, the individuals chronicled, I should say, said to each other, and even historical references there. That's really inventive.
Well, these are the things that affected Holmes and Watson, all of them, or the characters in their adventures. So I saw no reason to leave anything out.
Now, how long of a project is this? I mean, when did you first begin the work on this, and when can we expect to see it come to publication?
I'm not sure when I started, because it was scrappy notes to begin with. It was just going to be a short essay, which I was planning to present at my Portsmouth Society's meeting, and it became more and more. There was always something else to build into it. I think it must have been about 18 months in the making. As you've got to sit there, you've got to go through the canon, picking out all of the details, all of the clues to the dates. Then you've got to cross-reference them with each other, make sure they're not contradicting each other. And it was a long old process. There was a couple of very large spreadsheets involved. And there were times when I was really questioning my sanity at trying to take on this almost impossible task. But, it was kind of fun to take on something that you don't think you can do, and then get to the end. And I'm really happy with the result. Everything meshes really nicely. Yeah, it feels like quite an achievement, and you get an entirely new perspective on the canon as a result of it.
I'll bet you do. Yeah. Now, most Sherlockians, will go through maybe one story at a time when they're preparing for perhaps a quiz that they know is happening at their next society meeting. They'll read one of the stories, maybe closely, maybe just reread it again and skim over it. You've had to sit down with the entirety of the canon, all 60 stories, and really, as I say, go through it with a fine-tooth comb. When you were doing that, and gaining this intimate knowledge of the canon, what were some of the things that stood out? What was maybe the most fun surprise that you found, or something that made you think entirely differently than you had previously?
I'll tell you one of the fun things that I found. But this is my sense of humor. There is a nice reference. It's nothing to do with the dates. There's a nice reference in Case of Identity towards the end, where Holmes puts his feet up on the mantelpiece. He sits back in an armchair and he puts his feet up on the mantelpiece. And I couldn't get my head around that, how that could possibly be a comfortable position to be in. Until it struck me that what he was telling us, it amazes me that it's never been noticed before, but what he's telling us is he's actually got 2 false feet. And what he's done there is he's taken his feet off, he's put them up on the mantelpiece, and then relaxed without his prosthetics on. Little moments like that are really joyful.
That's interesting. Well, I thought we were going to begin a new society based on Sherlockian yoga for a moment.
Well, I tried it myself. My parents have got a nice wood-burning stove in their house and a nice armchair next to it. It doesn't work. If you want to put your back out, it's not going to happen. There's only one way that sentence makes sense.
Oh, I like that.
I never noticed that before. That's really interesting.
Well, I always thought he was doing a headstand.
From the armchair.
Yeah,
now I'm going to have to go redo my research.
Yeah, well, be careful. We don't want you getting hurt over there.
But, that explains a lot. I mean, his familiarity with disguising footprints, bicycle tires, he would naturally, therefore, be very sensitive to those sorts of things.
Exactly.
Jonathan Small.
Exactly. Think how quickly he came to the conclusion that there was a one-legged man in that room.
Right.
He knew what he was talking about.
Right.
A unidexter. Yes. Well, we will have links to Watson Does Not Lie, both the blog and the Wildside Press site. I know the book is scheduled to come out at some point over the next few weeks or so. We will follow up. Yeah, we'll follow up with definitive notification when that's the case. So I hear of Sherlock Everywhere listeners, consider yourselves on the inside track here to know before anyone else about Paul's book. Paul, you've got Doyle's Rotary Coffin, you've got Watson Does Not Lie, you've got the South Sea Shingle with your local group.
The Single of South Sea, yeah.
Shingle of South Sea. Yeah, well, what else are you going to be doing to keep yourself busy in the coming months and years ahead?
I think I've got enough on my plate at the moment. The Shingle of South Sea Society keeps me quite busy. That was early on. I decided I wanted to have a society locally, but I couldn't find anyone else to join. So it's a one-man society. But we hold a monthly meeting. I keep minutes of every meeting. I'll put them up on a website. We had an awards ceremony last year. One member did particularly well.
That's great. Well, you should connect with the Solitary Cyclist of Vermont. I believe that's right.
I know. It was Matthias Bostrom was telling me about that, and that's what made me go, yeah, I'm going to have my own society then. I don't care if there's nobody else to join it. I'm going to start one.
That's the spirit. I like that.
Well, you're always associated with like-minded people. That's just grand.
That's it.
Not always, no.
Well, Paul Thomas Miller, straight from Portsmouth, UK, of all of these wonderful things we've been talking about, Doyle's Rotary Coffin, Watson Does Not Lie, The Shingle of Southsea. Thank you so much for sharing your Holmesian and Sherlockian passions with us, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you ever so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Oh, it's been a treat. Thanks. Thanks to you. This is so much fun to talk to somebody like Paul who has this such a special take, but the fun aspect of it, is just wonderful. I love the idea of, a society of one person, and one of our members did particularly well this past.
Gee, I wonder who it could be this year. Nominations were fast and furious.
It's a stiff competition.
Well, look, it just shows overall what a great sense of humor Sherlockians have. I mean, you have to if you want to, kind of go tongue firmly planted in cheek, as Dorothy Sayers put it. To have this kind of fun, you need a sense of humor about you in general. So it's wonderful to see it expressed this way. I mean, even the Doyle's Rotary Coffin group, they've got the membership card there, but you don't need to print out the membership card if you want to be a member anyway. Just goes to show, wonderful, the wonderful fun that we all have with this.
But on Paul's site, you can print out a template to make a spinner. Yeah. And I always thought, I took a look at that. I thought it'd be wonderful if, as you spun the coffin around on the one side, you would have very alarmed looking, shocked Sir Arthur, and then on the other you'd have Lady Frances Carfax.
Oh boy. Well, that's why Lady Frances ended up an old maid, because she never was lucky at playing a game of spin the coffin. What can I tell you? Oh, that was the segue into the quiz, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now we're supposed to segue into Sherlock Holmes in the newspapers first.
Oh, never mind.
Which we don't have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's
do the quiz, and then we can fill in Matthias some other time.
Well, this is the section when you would normally hear the dulcet tones of Matthias Bostrom dialing in from Sweden and telling us all about Sherlock Holmes in the newspapers in our As We Go to Press feature. Well, Matthias has gotten in touch with us and let us know that he is hard at work on a bit of original research. He has discovered something, and he has a scoop here. And it's a scoop from a newspaper of over 100 years old. So, this is going to be interesting. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that in our very next episode. But in the meantime, we went into our own archives and pulled out something that Paul Miller sent us, just about 2 years ago. He said he was doing some of his research. In this case, it brought him to the Vatican. He was working in the archives of the Vatican, and he found in a section of an early version of the book of Genesis that the church has tried to suppress for many years. And he managed to smuggle it out in some cameos that he happened to have with him. And he provided us with a transcription. This is the original draft version of Genesis. In 1881, Holmes created the pipe and the dotles. And the pipe was without heat and smoke, and darkness was upon the bowl of the pipe. And the spirit of Holmes moved upon the floor of the single large airy sitting room. And Holmes said, "Let there be light." And the pipe was alight. And Holmes saw the ash, that it was good. And Holmes wrote a monograph upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobaccos. In it, he enumerated 140 forms of cigar, cigarette, and pipe tobacco, with colored plates illustrating the difference in the ash. And Holmes deduced the light was day, and from the darkness he deduced night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And Holmes said, let there be a Baker Street in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And Holmes made Baker Street, and it divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And Holmes called the Baker Street Heaven. And in the evening and the morning there were the second day. And Holmes said, let the waters around the Baker Street be gathered together unto the Thames, and let the London appear. And it was so. And Holmes called the London that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. And Holmes saw that it was afoot. And Holmes said, let the London bring forth a 7% solution of cocaine. And it was so. And the London brought forth cocoa, yielding seed after his kind, and the poppy whose seed was in itself after its kind. And Holmes saw that it was afoot. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And Holmes said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let me not be aware that London travels round the sun, for what the deuce is that to me? And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven, and to give light upon the London. And it was so. And Holmes made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the gas lamps also. And Holmes set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon London, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And Holmes decided that it would not make a pennyworth of a difference to him or to his work. And so he made the yellow fog to swirl down the street and drift across the dun-colored houses. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And Holmes said, let the Thames bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the London in an open firmament of heaven. And Holmes created venomous jellyfish and geese with crops that are at least big enough to hold gemstones. And Holmes poured himself a brandy, for he had not yet created the Mrs. Hudson to do it for him. And Holmes blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the Thames, and let fowl multiply in London, especially geese, with crops that are at least big enough to hold gemstones. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And Holmes said, let the London bring forth the living creature after his kind, monstrous hounds, remarkable worms, giant rats, and swamp adders. And it was so. And Holmes made the hound after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the London after his kind. And Holmes saw that it would make good plots later on. And Holmes said, let us make man in our image, but not as clever, after our likeness, but with a smaller nose, and let them have dominion over the jellyfish of the sea, and over the geese of the air, and over the hounds, and over all the London, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the London. So Holmes created man in his own image, but with a smaller nose. In the image of Holmes he created him. Male and female he created them, but not as clever. And he did not trust the female, nor giveth her the vote. And Holmes blessed them, and Holmes said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the London, and subdue it, and have dominion over the jellyfish of the sea, and over the geese of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the London. And after 26 stories, kill the female off, and try not to mention her again. And Holmes said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the London, and every tree in which the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every hound in the London, and every geese of the air, and everything that creepeth upon the London, where there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And Holmes saw everything that he had made, and behold, he was bored. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the Baker Street and the London were all completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, Holmes had finished the work he had been doing, and so, on the seventh day, he went to Simpson's for supper. Then Holmes blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he took his bottle from the corner of the mantelpiece, and his hypodermic syringe from its neat morocco case. Well, I think we should go with that version of the Bible. Well, they say this hobby is like a religion to some.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I hardly know what to say about that. That's lovely. Certainly, Holmes at the center of the universe.
Indeed.
But speaking of playing the game,
well, those dulcet tones mean it's time for another episode of the Canonical Couplet game. It's that game show that you love, that all Sherlockians know, or at least those that listen to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we give you a quote from one of the stories, or a two-line stanza about one of the stories, and you have to identify which one it came from. And in the last episode, you'll remember we gave you this clue. A horrid scandal's very apt to dawn, with public property at private pawn. Bert, do you know the answer to this one?
Yes, that refers to that strange case that involved the shooting party in the country and the game fowl that for some mysterious reason had not eaten for weeks. That's the adventure of the empty grouse.
Well, I hate to grouse at you, Bert, but that's not correct.
Oh, no.
Yeah. In this case, we were looking for the barrel coronet. Not a double-barreled one either. The barrel coronet. And we had a number of correct entries, so we will once again go to our spinning prize wheel here and wait for it to rotate, slow down, almost like Doyle's Rotary Coffin. And it lands on number 11. Number 11, and that is Ron Lees. Congratulations, Ron. How delightful. And, you know, it's funny because last episode we talked, of course, with Jim Hawkins about John Bennett Shaw. And if you go to the johnbennettshaw.com website and peruse through some of the old photographs there, you'll see photos of a young Ron Lees in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the Bennett Shaw compound. He was what Jim calls a brother-in-Shaw. So it's wonderful that your name, Ron, should be picked from all others in this very special prize-giving portion here. So we'll be in touch. Meanwhile, it's now time for another round of the Canonical Couplets. Are you ready, Bert?
I'm ready.
Okay, listen closely because next time around, I'm going to hold you to it. A curious message smote an old man's heart, and on it Sherlock tried his prentice art. If you know the story that this canonical couplet refers to, please put canonical couplet in the subject of your email. Address it to us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. And if you are among the correct answers, we may choose your name from at random to win a prize next time. Good luck. Well, here we are once again toward the end of an episode. I don't know what we're doing with ourselves.
Me neither. You know, the nice part about having a very poor memory is that every experience is new, and I just can't wait to hear this show because I'm just really excited to hear what we were talking about.
You are so right, Dave. Well, next time around, make sure you tune in because we are going to talk with someone who infiltrated a very exclusive Sherlockian society over 40 years ago and lived to tell about it. Who is it and what's the story? Well, you'll have to tune in. Until then, I remain the ever-mysterious Scott Monty.
And I'm the completely inscrutable Bert Wolder.
And together we say, the
game's
afoot!
The game's afoot!
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.